Ethan Carter has long cherished the quiet solace of his suburban home in Maple Grove Estates. A decorated military veteran turned devoted city official, he values every inch of his property, a sanctuary carefully maintained over years of hard work and sacrifice. Among the many treasures on his land, his private pond stands out. Nestled among weeping willows and bordered by a natural winding trail, the pond is his personal retreat, a place where he can unwind after a long day, cast a fishing line at sunrise, or simply reflect on life in the gentle ripples of the water. For Ethan, this pond represents freedom and the fruits of his labor. It's where he reconnects with nature, enjoys quiet mornings, and even teaches his young niece about the simple joys of life. Its serene beauty and its role as a vital part of his home make it irreplaceable, a haven that should never be infringed upon. But not everyone in Maple Grove Estates appreciates individuality. Enter Kerren, the self-appointed queen of the HOA. With her impeccably pressed attire, a perpetually clutched clipboard, and a rigid belief in uniformity, Kerren has made it her mission to police every detail of the community. To her, every lawn must be perfect, every fence trimmed, and every piece of property must conform to her idea of suburban order. One crisp morning, as Ethan made his way to his pond for his customary fishing session, he was startled to see a figure wading into his water. Through the soft light of dawn, he recognized Kerren, her fishing rod in hand and an expression that brooked no argument. "Ethan," she called out sharply, "I'm here to remind you that your pond is a private space that must adhere to community standards. Unauthorized fishing on private property is strictly prohibited." Ethan's initial shock quickly turned to indignation. "Kerren, this is my pond. I own it, and I have every right to fish here. I don't need your permission or your rules dictating how I enjoy my own property." But Kerren was unyielding. "The rules apply to everyone in Maple Grove Estates, Mr. Carter. Your disregard for the proper protocols not only disrupts our community's aesthetic, but it also sets a dangerous precedent. Consider this your first and final warning." A small group of neighbors, hidden behind hedges and parked cars, watched the confrontation with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. In that charged moment, Ethan realized that this wasn't just about a simple fishing trip. It was the opening salvo in a campaign of arbitrary control. As Kerren turned on her heel and strode away, her high heels clicking authoritatively on the pavement, Ethan's resolve solidified. He would defend his pond and his right to live freely against anyone who sought to trample his hard-won sanctuary. The very next morning, as Ethan sipped his coffee by the pond, he found a pristine envelope in his mailbox bearing the official seal of the Maple Grove Estates HOA. Inside, a fine of $750 was detailed for unauthorized recreational fishing and water usage on his private property. The legal language was dense, designed more to intimidate than to clarify the rules. Outside his property line, Kerren stood with arms crossed and an expression of smug satisfaction. "Remember, Mr. Carter," she said coolly, "the rules are applied uniformly across our community. Your failure to follow proper protocol disrupts our established standards." Refusing to be cowed by bureaucratic overreach, Ethan immediately visited the local zoning office. Armed with proof of his ownership and a record of years of private use, he confirmed that no local ordinance prevented him from using his pond as he wished. The officer, though sympathetic, warned him that the HOA was notorious for stretching community guidelines to suit its own agenda. Back home, the situation worsened. In the early hours of the next day, unannounced inspectors arrived at Ethan's property. They measured the pond's boundaries, inspected his fencing, and peppered him with questions about his recreational activities, all delivered in a tone that left no room for discussion. Each intrusive visit deepened Ethan's sense of violation. It was clear that Kerren was determined to force him into compliance. That evening, during an emergency HOA meeting held in the overly sterile community center, Kerren took the stage and declared with unwavering authority, effective immediately, any homeowner found violating community standards will face further fines and potential legal action. Her words resonated with a sense of finality that sent shivers down the spines of the assembled residents. Sitting quietly in the back, Ethan's determination only grew stronger. The fine was not just a financial penalty. It was an attempt to subdue his independence and force conformity. That night, Ethan resolved to document every intrusive action and every violation of his property rights, preparing for the battle that was about to escalate. In the days following the initial fine, Kerren's tactics became increasingly aggressive. Neighbors began to exchange hushed complaints about fines for trivial infractions, a slightly overgrown bush here, a misplaced decorative light there. Rumors spread that Kerren was using her authority to target anyone who dared to live a little differently, and that fines mysteriously vanished when large donations were made to the HOA fund. Determined to uncover the full extent of the abuse, Ethan installed discreet cameras around his pond and property. Night after night, he reviewed the footage. It quickly became apparent that inspectors were arriving in coordinated pairs shortly after each HOA meeting, their behavior edging into harassment. On several occasions, Ethan even caught shadowy figures, apparently hired by the HOA, to monitor his activities, as if extra measures were needed to enforce compliance. Late one night, while compiling his pond protection files, a growing binder of photographs, video clips, and testimonials from other aggrieved homeowners, Ethan realized that Kerren's campaign was not solely about maintaining a pristine community. A disillusioned board member confided in him that the fines were a means of generating revenue and consolidating power. "It's all about control," the board member whispered. "Those fines are just a tool to keep us all in line." With every piece of evidence added to his files, Ethan's resolve grew. This wasn't just about a private pond. It was about exposing a corrupt system that prized conformity over individual rights. The pond protection files became his arsenal, and he began to plan a counterattack that would force the community to confront the HOA's abuse of power once and for all. One brisk morning, Ethan awoke to an unsettling sight. Heavy machinery had been parked near his pond, and sections of the natural bank were being reinforced with industrial materials. The HOA claimed this was for community safety upgrades, but Ethan recognized it as a thinly veiled attempt to impose tighter control over his private property. His tranquil oasis was being forcibly transformed into something sterile and regulated, a move designed to justify further restrictions. Enraged by the intrusion, Ethan gathered all the evidence from his pond protection files and prepared for a public confrontation. At the next scheduled HOA meeting, held in the imposing yet impersonal community center, Ethan took the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady yet passionate, "what you're about to see is a gross abuse of power that not only violates my rights, but also undermines our collective freedom." He proceeded to play a series of video clips. Inspectors measuring his property, unannounced visits by individuals in plain clothes, and footage of the heavy machinery disrupting the natural contours of his pond. As the evidence unfolded on the large screen, the room fell into a heavy silence. Homeowners began murmuring their own stories of arbitrary fines and intrusive inspections. Kerren, seated at the front with a steely glare, attempted to interject. "These measures are for the benefit of all residents," she declared, but her voice faltered under the weight of the evidence. "This isn't about one pond. It's about our fundamental right to enjoy our property without undue interference," Ethan continued. "We deserve transparency and respect, not tyranny cloaked in bureaucratic language." The mood in the room shifted palpably as one by one, neighbors began sharing their own grievances. The collective defiance was unmistakable. The community was no longer willing to tolerate Kerren's overreach. Ethan's bold confrontation not only exposed the corruption, but ignited a spark of rebellion that rippled through Maple Grove Estates, signaling the beginning of the end for arbitrary HOA control. Cornered by mounting evidence and an emboldened community, Kerren resorted to one final, desperate gambit. Late one humid evening, determined to regain control over the narrative, she dialed 911. Kerren claimed that Ethan's use of his private pond for recreational fishing constituted a public disturbance that endangered community safety, a blatant fabrication intended to justify her authoritarian measures. Within minutes, uniformed police arrived at the property. Standing calmly by his pond, Ethan greeted the officers and, with measured authority, presented his official credentials. "There's no disturbance here," he explained. "This is my private property, and I have every legal right to use it as I see fit." The officers, recognizing the absurdity of the claim, left after issuing a stern warning to Kerren about misusing emergency services. Not one to be easily deterred, Kerren escalated her covert tactics by hiring a private investigator to catch Ethan in a compromising act that would validate her baseless claims. However, thanks to Ethan's vigilant installation of security cameras, the investigator's every furtive move was captured on film as he prowled near the pond, a clear act of trespassing. At the subsequent HOA meeting, a session Kerren had banked on to reassert her authority, Ethan unveiled the damning evidence. He projected the security footage onto a large screen for all to see. The room filled with shocked gasps and murmurs as Kerren's final, desperate move was laid bare. Her face flushed with humiliation as the assembled homeowners expressed their unequivocal support for Ethan's right to privacy and autonomy. It was clear that Kerren's attempts to enforce her arbitrary rules through intimidation had backfired spectacularly. The evidence had exposed not only her overreach, but the underlying corruption that fueled it, leaving her authority hanging by a thread. In the wake of the explosive revelations at the HOA meeting, the atmosphere in Maple Grove Estates shifted dramatically. At an emergency meeting convened by a coalition of fed-up homeowners, the mood was electric with determination. With the damning evidence of unauthorized trespassing, invasive inspections, and Kerren's desperate maneuvers presented for all to see, the residents voted overwhelmingly to remove Kerren from the HOA board. The decision sent shockwaves throughout the community. Within days, local authorities launched a full-scale investigation into the HOA's practices. Reports detailed a systematic pattern of arbitrary fines, invasive inspections, and financial mismanagement. The rigid structure that Kerren had so zealously defended began to crumble under the weight of undeniable evidence and widespread public outrage. For Kerren, the consequences were immediate and severe. Her personal assets, once flaunted as symbols of her authority, came under intense scrutiny. Financial irregularities and unethical behavior were exposed, and her once pristine home was quickly put up for sale. The enforcer of draconian rules had become a cautionary tale of unchecked entitlement and abuse of power. Ethan, watching from the sanctuary of his property, felt a deep sense of vindication. His fight to protect his private pond had evolved into a battle for the rights of every homeowner in Maple Grove Estates. Neighbors, emboldened by the community's victory, began sharing their own stories of past grievances, and together they envisioned a future defined by fairness and respect for individual rights. As the old HOA structure disintegrated, new policies emerged, ones built on transparency, accountability, and genuine neighborly collaboration. Ethan's pond, once a target of invasive fines and unauthorized fishing, now stood as a symbol of resistance and the triumph of individual freedom over bureaucratic tyranny. With a quiet smile and a cup of coffee in hand, he watched as the remnants of Kerren's oppressive reign faded into the past. With the community united and the corrupt practices of the old HOA exposed, local authorities had no choice but to take decisive legal action. Investigations into the invasive inspections, arbitrary fines, and overall abuse of power revealed that the rules enforced by the HOA were nothing more than a pretext for personal gain. The city imposed steep fines on the HOA for violating homeowners' rights, and a class action lawsuit was swiftly filed on behalf of the aggrieved residents. At a press conference held in the newly reformed community center, Ethan stood before a crowd of reporters and relieved neighbors. "Today, we've shown that no one is above the law," he stated in a measured tone. "Our community will no longer be held hostage by arbitrary rules and unchecked power." This legal victory marks the beginning of a new era in Maple Grove Estates. As court dates were set and legal documents piled up, individual board members began facing personal legal consequences for their roles in the oppression. Even Kerren's longtime legal advisor was scrutinized for his complicity in the abuses. The collapse of the old system was not just symbolic, It was a comprehensive legal reckoning that sent a clear message to communities everywhere. Fairness and transparency must prevail. For Ethan, this legal triumph was the final power move, a vindication of his long-fought battle against tyranny. The class action lawsuit not only promised financial restitution for the wronged homeowners, but also paved the way for an entirely new framework of community governance. Maple Grove Estates was now poised to enter a future defined by respect, cooperation, and true neighborly spirit. As the legal and public consequences mounted, Kerren's personal life began to unravel in dramatic fashion. Once the iron-fisted enforcer of Maple Grove Estates rules, she soon found herself isolated, ridiculed, and financially ruined. The spectacle of her unauthorized fishing on Ethan's private pond, captured in damning footage, and her desperate attempts to enforce arbitrary rules turned her once formidable reputation into a public laughingstock. Within weeks, her prized sedan was repossessed amid mounting debts, and rumors of personal turmoil spread like wildfire. Whispers of a crumbling marriage and financial instability became common conversation among residents. The very authority she had wielded so ruthlessly was now her undoing, and the community's scorn was as relentless as it was justified. In a final ironic twist, Kerren attempted to salvage her reputation by seeking employment in property management. Instead, she was offered an entry-level position as an assistant property manager for another HOA, a bitter, public admission of her fall from grace. At a local networking event, a former neighbor couldn't resist the jab. "I hope you enjoy following the rules now, Kerren." The remark, laced with humor and triumph, perfectly encapsulated her complete collapse. Ethan, watching these developments from the peaceful confines of his private pond, felt a deep sense of poetic justice. His fight had never been solely about protecting his property. It was about defending the right to live freely, without interference from arbitrary, overreaching authority. Kerren's humiliating downfall served as a powerful reminder that unchecked entitlement inevitably crumbles beneath the weight of truth and community unity. In the months following Kerren's dramatic downfall, Maple Grove Estates blossomed into a community reborn. The oppressive days of arbitrary fines, invasive inspections, and overbearing rules faded away, replaced by an atmosphere of collaboration, creativity, and genuine respect for individual freedoms. Neighbors gathered by the pond to share stories, laughter, and a collective sense of liberation. Ethan, whose private pond had once been the target of unauthorized fishing and relentless intrusion, now enjoyed its serene beauty in peace. At a lively neighborhood block party, a celebration of their reclaimed freedom, a cheerful resident presented him with a handmade HOA violation notice for excessive pond serenity. The crowd erupted in laughter as Ethan held the sign aloft and remarked with a wry smile, "They really tried." As dusk settled over Maple Grove Estates and the soft glow of twilight danced on the water's surface, the memory of tyranny became a distant echo. The community had reclaimed not only its rights, but its spirit, a spirit that valued individuality, creativity, and the joy of living on one's own terms. In that final, golden moment of celebration, as neighbors toasted to their victory and laughter filled the warm evening air, the screen of a once oppressive era faded to black, a final mic drop that signaled the ultimate triumph of a united community over entitlement.